So we are thinking about the first 11 chapters in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is the first book in the Bible, and it's foundational for our faith. I've been saying that there are two parts of the Bible. A lot of times we think it's the Old Testament and New Testament. However, my thinking after studying Genesis for several years is really there's two parts of the Bible, two halves. Genesis 1 through 11 and Genesis 12 through Revelation 22. That's how foundational I think Genesis 1 through 11 is. And it's foundational for at least two reasons. When our world, when our friends, when our families, when our neighbors don't know the stories in Genesis 1 through 11, life does not make sense. Because in Genesis 1 through 11, it starts to answer the basic questions that people have. And if you don't have these stories as a center, your circumference is confusing, ultimately. If you don't have that foundation of these stories, because they ask the basic questions that everyone asks, whether they know it or not, if you don't have that foundation, there's no lasting fulfillment. No center, the circumference is messed up. No foundation in these stories and the questions that these stories answer, no lasting fulfillment. The 5 questions that I've been sharing with you are these. The 5 questions of life. Who is God? See, people, whether they're religious or irreligious, at some point in their life, they're going to ask these questions. Who is God? What is all about? Is there even a God? And if there is a God, what's God like? The second question would be, well, who are human beings? Who am I? Who am I anyway? What's my purpose? What's my reason for being? Am I just an accident? Who is God? Who am I? And then, what's the problem? What is the problem? There is a problem in our world. Everyone can see that. Most people just don't think the problem is here. It's there, right? What's the problem? Why is there warfare? Why is there killing? Why is there meanness? Why do I gossip? Why do I think these thoughts? Who is God? Who am I? Who are human beings? What's the problem? And is there an answer? What's the answer? Who has the answer? And the last one, is there anything I must do? And so Genesis 1 through 11 is critical because they start to answer these questions. And 1,200 years later, about 1,200 years later, in the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the snake crusher, these questions would become more illuminated. So in Genesis 1 through 11 are the seeds of the Christian faith, are the seeds that answer or help answer these 5 questions. So we're in Genesis 4 today. And let me just catch you up on the story so far. And I say story for a reason. Genesis is a story. It's not a fable. It's not like once upon a time there was a tree. And it's not that kind of story. It's a poetic story that helps answer these 5 questions. Genesis is focused on answering the questions of who and what rather than how. And we've talked about this before. Who is God? Who am I? What's the problem? Not how. The questions that Genesis seeks to answer is not, well, how old is the earth? And how did God create Adam and Eve? Did he go boonk? Or was it evolutionary? That's not what Genesis is primarily about. Genesis is not about, how did God create the white-tailed bobo bird? I made that up. You didn't know that. There is no white-tailed bobo bird, I don't think. But the point is, it doesn't answer the question of how. It answers the question of who and what. So, now in Genesis, after the creation of the creation in Genesis 1 and 2, chapter 2 ends this way. The man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. I love that verse. It's not just talking about physical nakedness. It's talking about emotional nakedness. It's talking about spiritual nakedness. It's talking about relational nakedness. There's no hiding. There's nothing to hide from, and there's nothing to cover up. There's no sin in the world. And the man and his wife were both naked, and there was no shame. How perfect was that relationship? As Ray Charles used to sing, what a wonderful world. And then in the beginning of Genesis 3 that we looked at last week, We saw that there was the beginning of temptation because there was a snake, a serpent. And so Adam and Eve broke the boundary, crossed the line, ate of the proverbial apple, and then they hid. They tried to run from God. And we've been running ever since. People have been running ever since. If you do a quick scan through the Bible, God calls Moses to go to Pharaoh and he runs away. Jonah runs away from God because he doesn't want to go to Nineveh, because he's afraid they'll come to faith and God will heal them. He doesn't like the Ninevites, so he runs away. Elijah runs away from Queen Jezebel. The rich young ruler runs away from Jesus when his teaching gets too hard. And of course, the disciples run away from Jesus in the garden. And today in Genesis 4, we're going to see a man by the name of Cain also try and run away. So our text in Genesis 4 starts out this way. Adam made love to his wife Eve. Now there's a stained glass window you'll never see in church. Get that image out of your mind. Adam and Eve made love. Mommy, what's that? Ah, don't look at that window. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. You with me now? Okay. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of the flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Storyline is this. Two brothers are born to Adam and Eve. Cain is the firstborn. Abel is the secondborn. Cain works the soil as a farmer, and Abel works the land as a shepherd. Two brothers make an offering, and appropriate for their job. And Abel's offering, God says, I really like this. Maybe God's a vegetarian, maybe not. But God and his offering, Cain and his offering, he did not like. And when I read that for the first time years ago, I said, well, that's not fair. I mean, that's not fair at all. What's the deal with Cain's offering? What's wrong with meat? You know, why do you say no to that? And as a firstborn, he's not used to playing second fiddle to his secondborn. I know, I'm a firstborn. There's nothing wrong with the offering that Cain offered. An animal offering is not worse than vegetable offering. So there's nothing wrong with the offering, but there is something wrong with the one bringing the offering, the offerer. There's nothing wrong with the offering, but God knows there's something wrong with the offerer, with Cain's heart. The text continues. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you so angry? Again, we've been kind of tracking the questions in Genesis. And so far we've seen where God asks this, where are you? Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? And now the question, why are you so angry? And as I've been saying, God and Jesus asks questions not because God doesn't know. He doesn't know whether Cain is, he doesn't know that, he knows that Cain is angry. He doesn't ask, Adam and Eve, where are you? Because he has no idea where they are. He asks them and us questions to woo us out of hiding. Because he knows that there's a disconnection. And so these questions, like a good parent who says, did you eat that cookie in the cookie jar? You know they ate the cookie in the cookie jar. But you ask the question, did you eat the cookie in the cookie jar? To bring your kid back to kind of confess. And do they ever? No. But the questions are asked anyway. Again, not to shame, not to guilt, but to bring out of hiding, to create a dialogue once again. In our text, God confronts Cain about his anger. This is a perfect opportunity for Cain to grow up and allow God to change his heart and allow God to help him become emotionally more mature. Cain is a good example of someone who goes through the religious motions. He looks spiritual on the outside, but he's immature emotionally. And you can't be emotionally immature and spiritually mature at the same time, as we're going to study in the weeks to come. You know, Cain went to church. He gave his offering. He sang in the choir. He was an elder. He taught Sunday school. He guest preached every now and then. But something's stirring underneath the surface. He's not emotionally healthy when it comes to anger, and he is angry. Well, will Cain listen? Will Cain listen to God, or will he listen to himself? Cain has a choice. Will he grow up, or will he stay in his anger? Cain chooses to stay in his anger and run away from God. Why would he choose that? Why would Cain choose to stay in his anger? Jesus once asked a man who had been an invalid, sick, for 38 years. He said, "Do you want to get well?" And again, I remember reading that question of Jesus, who asked a man who hadn't walked in 38 years, "Do you want to get well?" If I'm that man, what would you say? Well, of course I want to get well. Do you want to get well? But think about it. Do you want to get well? Yes. Are there places of ill health in your life? I mean, doesn't getting well sometimes or maybe often involve pain, change, being vulnerable? Yes. Isn't getting well for many of us painful because we have to go back and look at our childhood and look at how our mom or our dad or our caretaker took care of us or didn't take care of us? And the roots of ill health are connected to that upbringing? Anybody tracking with that? It's painful to go back and see how mom wasn't a good mom or dad wasn't a good dad, or worse. Right? Do you want to get well? Yeah, I want to get well, but I just don't want to go through what I have to go through to get well. Oh, do you really want to get well? Maybe. Getting well might be knowing yourself in a way that's embarrassing. Getting well might involve saying you're sorry or confessing. Getting well might be admitting that you need help. Sometimes we hear the hard truth about ourselves and it hurts, and we don't want to listen and we want to stuff it. Am I tracking with anyone here today? And so we run. Years ago, I used to meet with a group of pastors once a year for fun and to talk about church leadership, but really to ask hard questions. We wanted to be transparent. And so what we would do is every day a few guys would sit in a circle with all the other guys around, and they'd ask questions. We'd ask questions. And I was in the circle. It was my turn this one particular year, and they said, how's things going? How's your this? How's your that? How's that? And I could tell something was stirring in me, and someone asked me, said, are you upset? Are you angry right now? What are you feeling right now? Are you angry? I said, well, honestly, I am a little angry, but I have hope, and I'm praying, and I'm in therapy, and things are going to go well. And one of my friends said, bull sugar. That's how pastors swear, or at least that's how pastors swear when you're telling the story in a sermon. He goes, you're mad as hell, and you don't even know it. And I remember thinking, well, I wasn't, but I am now. But the rest of the day, I got to think, I said, am I mad as hell? Am I really that mad? Am I really mad? And I was more mad than I was aware. And when I think in the past I became aware of just how mad I was, I stuffed it. Do you want to get well? Yeah, but I don't want to have to confront why I'm so angry. Because I don't know how to express angry really well. Because I grew up in a home that didn't express anger. where never is heard a discouraging word and the skies are not cloudy all day. That was my home. And it was a good home, but man, we did not know how to express anger. I still don't. I'm much, much better at it. But when you've stuffed that stuff for years and someone catches you on it, bull sugar, you're angry as hell and you don't even know it. Do you want to get well? God's question to Cain, are you angry, is a question asked, hoping that Cain will have the courage to look at his anger. The text continues. If you want to do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, here's the first time in the scriptures that the word sin is used. And just quickly, I want us to think about this word that we don't like to say or maybe think about. But there are 5 things from that verse about sin. First of all, sin is an action. Go back to the verse, please. If you do what is right, sin is not doing what is right. Sin is an action. God tells us to do one thing in the scriptures or through the Spirit, and we don't do it. That's labeled sin. It's falling short of God's standards. It's not following what God clearly tells us to do. So let's look at a couple things really fast. God says, do not murder. Okay, I'm good on that one. I'm not a sinner yet. God says, do not commit adultery. Okay, a little easier. God says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Oops. Think of some of the commands of the Apostle Paul. He says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up. If you don't do that, you sin. Abstain from sexual immorality. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Forgive one another. Do not speak badly about another person. See, if you do any of those things, the definition of sin is not doing what is right. And of course, James says, if you know the good you ought to do, but you don't do it, that is sin. So you don't need to raise your hand, but any sinners here? This is why the apostle says all have sinned and just fall short of the Apostle Paul, of the standards. Everybody just falls short of the Apostle Paul too. But all have sinned and fall short of the glory, the standards of God. Everybody. That's why everybody's welcome, because nobody's perfect. Well, if there's anyone here that falls into any of that, cheer up. It gets worse. Sin is not just your actions. Sin is your attitudes. It's not just what you do, it's what you think. See, Cain had the right actions. He went to church. Here's my offering. But inside, his attitude wasn't right. The author of Hebrews says that God judges the Word of God judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. I mean, we can't come before a holy God who sees everything we do and stand, let alone what we think. That's why Jesus said, if you commit adultery, that's a sin. And all the religious people said, that's right. And then he said, if you look at another person with lust in your heart, that's also a sin. And they went, oops. Jesus said, if you murder someone, that's a sin. That's your action. And they said, all right, we agree with you, Jesus. And then he said, if you harbor bitterness or anger towards someone else, that's also a sin. And they probably went, oh, that's a little different. Sin is not just actions and attitudes. Sin isn't just what we do with our body. Sin is what we do with our minds. Sin, number 3, can be really subtle. Really subtle. Sometimes sin is really obvious, like murder, stealing, kind of the big whopper deals, big whopper sins. We know what those are. Sometimes sin shows up and says, here I am, I'm going to cause you to do this, and you're going to be chained. You're going to be chained. And you're really aware of sin. But go back to that verse if you can, sorry. There you go, thank you. Sin is crouching at your door. See, the imagery in this is that sin is subtle and sneaky. And sometimes it's just waiting for you, just kind of crouching, waiting to pounce on you. And you're unaware. You tracking with that? Sometimes sin is very obvious, but a lot of times it's just not so obvious. It's crouching, it's hiding, it's not easily seen or detected. Years ago, I heard this story that I'm about to tell you right now about a guy who told me this story about when he was a kid growing up. He said a neighbor, his parents bought him a little boa constrictor snake. He was really into snakes. And it was a little baby snake, and the snake grew up in the house, and of course they tamed it. I don't know how you tame a boa constrictor, but it became their house pet. They named it. I don't know the name they named it, but it became part of the family. Years and years later, the snake stopped eating, and it started losing weight, and it became lethargic. And this was their beloved family pet. The worry reached its peak when one morning the woman woke up and the snake was lying against it, having lost weight. The reason this was startling for her was they had a dog who did the same thing, and right before the dog died, about a week, the dog would come and lay at the woman's feet. And when the dog passed away, they assumed that the dog did that as a way of saying goodbye, because animals sometimes, or maybe often, have that sense. So they were really scared that, oh no, our beloved boa constrictor is doing the same thing. So they took the boa constrictor to the vet, and they told the story of what was going on. The vet looked at the boa constrictor, and the vet supposedly said these words: "I can't give you your boa constrictor back. Your boa constrictor is saying goodbye, but not in the way you think. Your boa constrictor is starving itself to death to make room in its body for food, and it's lying beside you to measure you to see if you're going to fit." Now, I don't know if boa constrictors do that or not, but the whole point is that's like sin. It's subtle. It's sometimes sin can be your family pet, part of your family system, part of your life. It's so warm and cuddly, and it just comes up beside you, but it's crouching, waiting to devour you. Maybe it's alcohol. Maybe it's sexuality. Maybe it's arrogance or pride. Maybe it's lying. Maybe it's stealing. But it just feels so normal. It's been a part of our family system. This is who I am. No. Sin is our action. Sin is our attitude. And sin is just sneaky and so subtle. It snuggles up next to us. Sin is also a power. Number 4, sin is a power. Sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you. Desires mean it desires to destroy you. It desires to devour you. And again, crouching at your door is a picture of a wild animal. Sin is not just something we pursue. Sin pursues us. It crouches, it waits, and it is a power. Jesus said this: "I tell you the truth, everyone who sins becomes a slave to sin." Sin can enslave us. Do you know this from observation of other people in your own life? You can become enslaved to it, Jesus said. It can become an addiction. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says. He says, "I have the desire to do what is good, but I can't carry it out." You ever feel that way? I know the good I should do, I just can't carry it out. Now listen to the wrestling match he has. "For I do not do the good I want to do, but the thing that I do is the evil I don't want to do. This I just keep doing. For in my inner being I delight in God's law." In my inner being, I want to follow the right paths because I want God to bless me. In my inner being, I want to follow the right paths because I don't want to live in guilt. I want to live in freedom. In my inner being, I want to follow what's true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, and praiseworthy because I want to bless others around me. And then he says this: "But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind." there's something else in me, the Apostle Paul says. That I don't get it, but it's waging war against the law of the Spirit. It makes me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. And then he says, oh, what a wretched man I am. And then he says, who will rescue me? Who will rescue me? And he goes, thanks be to God. Through Jesus Christ, I'm rescued. His chains are taken away. His jail cell is opened, not because of his own effort, but because of Jesus. Sin is wrong actions, sin is wrong attitudes, sin is subtle, sin is a power. And lastly, just sin can be overcome. Sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must master it. We'll never fully overcome. Until the day we die, we'll still have tendencies of brokenness called sin within us. But we can overcome a lot of its power. We can master it. We can rule over it. We can overcome it. And that's part of the purpose of this emotionally healthy spirituality. It's going to help us to slow down, to become more and more like Jesus. In fact, Jesus said this. He said, students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will become like their teacher. You want to be like Jesus? You want to be strong like Jesus? You want to be compassionate like Jesus? Want to have purpose like Jesus? Want to love and forgive like Jesus? Then don't just try harder, train better. You've heard me say that before, and you'll hear it 25,000 more times. And that's what this... What do we do with sin? How do we overcome sin? This is for another time, but one is just confess it. Confess it, Lord, I do this, I don't do this, I think this, I don't think that. Help me, Lord, help me. Holy Spirit, I need you. I need help. If the Apostle Paul needed help, you need help. I need help. We need help. Do you want to get well? We confess. The text continues. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, should be a capital A, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? Again, another question by God, not that he has no idea, but even in that, even in the midst of murder, God is like, come on out of hiding, Abel. There's going to be a consequence, but there's also grace. Here's what Cain says. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? God comes with another question. And Cain just gets in his face with a bold-faced lie and some hard-headed sarcasm. I don't know where my brother is. What am I? Am I supposed to look after my brother? Isn't that your job? Text continues. The Lord said, what have you done? Another question. Again, God knows exactly what's done, but he's still asking questions, hoping that Cain will come out of hiding and tell the truth and confess. Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse. Here comes the consequence. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. That's what sin will do. It'll make us a restless wanderer. Not immediately all the time, and maybe not that year, but at some point in our lives, when we allow sin to captivate us, we will become a restless wanderer. Cain said to the Lord, now he's going to start coming out. My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Cain finally speaks some truth. He's starting to confess, and then finally the text ends this way. But the Lord said to him, not so. Not so. Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. How does God respond to the reality of sin? First, there's always judgment. There's consequence. God is holy and God is just. But God is loving. He's loving. He always responds when we confess and come clean. There'll be scars, there'll be consequences, but there's grace. There's second chances and third chances and four chances. Sin says not to Cain. Not. You are not going to prosper. You are not going to have a family. You are not going to have hope. You are not going to experience life. Your sin and my sin says not. You're not going to experience joy. You're not going to experience a second chance. You are not going to experience love. You're not going to experience fulfillment. That's what sin is saying to you and to me and to Cain. And I love this text. Go back to the verse. But the Lord said to him, not so. See, sin says not. God says not so. Not so. Cain, it is not so that you will not have a family. It's not so that you will be a restless wanderer and you will not settle down. Cain, it's not so that you will live under a curse. You'll live under a grace. You'll live under amazing grace. The serpent and sin say not on your life, but God says not so. Not so. Where do you need that not so of hope today? Where do you need that not so? In your parenting? The evil one says not. It's never going to be the same. It's not going to be good. Well, maybe it won't be the same. But God can say not so. Don't listen to those voices. Don't think those things. Don't feel those feelings. You can have life again. It might not be the same. It might not be what you've hoped for. But God's not so is God's amazing grace. The change that you have put on yourself, or that you have allowed to put on yourself, the cell that you have allowed yourself to be in, can be opened, can be set free. That is God's amazing grace. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this story written 3,400 years ago. And yet, it has my name in it and your name in it. Our names are in this. This is our story too. This story helps make sense of our stories. And so may we heed it. May we follow it. May we believe in it. May we trust it. We thank you for your grace, Lord. Your amazing, amazing grace. In Jesus' name, amen.